Hello, and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain the Bible one chapter at a time. My name is Luke, I'm your host, and today we're talking about Genesis chapter 9. So let's read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible, and while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe, the follow button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Genesis 9 has 29 verses. Let's go ahead and read the chapter. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from every man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years. And he died. So we have now come to Genesis chapter 9, and thank you for joining in for another podcast. Context-wise, this is the tail end of the story of Noah, his family, the ark, and the global flood. So in chapter 6, we're introduced to this concept of the flood, that it's coming. Noah is told to build an ark to save himself from the wicked generation of people that's going to be destroyed by God. In chapter 7, we see the flood waters coming on the earth. In chapter 8, we see the flood waters receding. And now in Genesis chapter 9, Noah is off of the ark, and God is giving him some instructions for how to move forward in life and to repopulate this brand new earth that these 8 people roughly are now inhabiting with this somewhat small group of animals. They need to fill this earth. And God's going to give them some instructions how to do that and some things that they need to avoid doing that were probably pretty common in the pre-flood world, especially because we know that it was a very violent place. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Let's go into our outline and look at our key questions. You can download our outlines at tobelikechrist.com for free. You can also get a book on Amazon that contains all of the Genesis outlines if you would like it. There's links to all that stuff in the description. So let's talk about when these events happen, who our main characters are, and where the events happen, starting with when, as always. So these events occurred in the years immediately following the global flood. The flood occurred approximately 1,650 years after the creation of the world. Now, where exactly does that put us on a timeline in comparison to some other Old Testament or biblical figures that we know about, like Abraham, David, Jesus? How far is this back from the modern day? We're going to talk about that in our next study because we're going to get some more information in the upcoming chapters as to the distance between some of these people, some of these characters like Shem, Ham, and Japheth that we're going to be talking about, the sons of Noah, and some characters like Abraham who are coming down the line and are significant to the Bible story. So if you want to know where exactly this is in comparison to, say, the modern day, join us for our next study in Genesis chapter 10. Let's talk about the main characters in this chapter. Well, first of all, we have Noah. Noah was the individual who God selected to be the saved representative of the human race from the flood. Noah built the ark and survived the flood by God's grace. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, we're going to learn a little bit more about them and who they will become. They are going to be the fathers of great nations that spread across the earth. Really, all human beings are descendants of these individuals. So we're going to learn a little bit more about them. They've been in the background thus far, but now they kind of get a little bit of spotlight here in Genesis chapter 10. Where did these events happen? Well, as we talked about, the flood was a global flood. We don't know exactly where Noah was when he built the ark and where the ark set off from, where it was lifted off the earth by the waters of the flood. We do know that when the waters receded, the ark ran aground on the mountains of Ararat. Now, nobody knows the exact location of the mountains of Ararat. There are some theories. Many people theorize that it was in modern-day Armenia or that it was in the east of modern Turkey, somewhere over there. And when we look at the way that the nation spread out after the flood and the limited details that we have, that would seem to make sense, but that's just kind of a general guess. No one knows for sure. And at least to this day, in 2025, no one has been able to find the ark. The archaeologists are looking hard. As of right now, it is still a mystery where exactly the remnants, if there are any, of the ark are sitting on the earth. So this brings us to our outline section. We want to break this chapter down, comprehend what we just read. I've got it broken down into 3 sections. I'll read you the headings for those 3 sections. The first one, God instructs Noah following the flood. Number 2, God's promise and the rainbow. And then number 3, Noah's drunkenness and Ham's curse. So let's talk about the first one. This is verses 1 through 7 of our 29 verses. God instructs Noah following the flood. So God told Noah and his sons to have children and to repopulate the earth. Can you imagine being on an earth where it was just you and your immediate family and that was all the human beings on the entire world? That would be pretty crazy, but it is now their responsibility to, quote, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And obviously the hope is that the people that are born now are going to be a little better than those who came before the flood. God then gives all of the animals and the plants to this family, Noah's family, for food. But he gives them some instructions for how they are to eat the meat that they kill and use for food. I think it's interesting here that we don't have any record of human beings eating meat, or at least the people who were following God's will of eating meat before the flood. It seems likely that those immoral people who were disobeying God before the flood, they very well might have been meat eaters. But it seems that God had not authorized the eating of animals up to this point, at least as far as we know. But now he gives Noah and his family the right to eat meat, but there's a qualification, there's a restriction on it. They're not supposed to eat meat with blood in it. And the reason for that is because blood, and we see this throughout the Bible, blood was to be respected because it gave life to animals and to humans. There's also a prohibition against murder. And there was a punishment given for if a man did murder another man. If a man killed another man, the murderer was supposed to be put to death. His life was required. Murder was a really serious crime because God made humans in his image, and we do not have the right to take the life of another image bearer of God. So it's a very serious thing. We see that it began almost as soon as the world began with Cain killing his brother. And we're told that in the pre-flood world, the earth was filled with violence. And so it makes sense that God would prioritize this instruction. He says, a man is not to kill another man. We also read about one of Cain's descendants, I believe it was Lamech, who had killed a man very early on. And so the early earth was full of violence. God doesn't want that to be the case again. He says, you do not have the right to kill another man because men are made in my image. Murder has traditionally been something that people have taken very seriously and considered a terrible crime in most cultures. And that's a good thing because even to this day, men are made in the image of God, and the same restriction applies. You aren't to go around killing other people. That's not okay. You do not destroy what God has created. So this takes us to section number 2, God's promise and the rainbow, or the bow, verses 8 through 17. So God made a covenant with Noah, with his sons, and with all the living creatures on earth that came out of the ark. Maybe the question to ask is first, what is a covenant? It's not really a word we use a ton these days, I guess. But a covenant, according to Webster's dictionary, is a formal, solemn, and binding agreement. So kind of like a promise, maybe a little bit more serious. God promised never to flood the earth and to destroy all things again with a similar global flood. And he gives this sign, which he said is going to remind him of this covenant. He gives the sign of the bow, or we would say the rainbow, in the clouds as a reminder of the promise. So, when it rains, and then usually when the sun comes out very quickly after it rains, you'll see the rainbow in the sky. And so the rain ceases. It's not going to persist on the earth forever. The sun comes back out, and there is the reminder of the covenant that God makes. Some people might say, well, that's just natural. There's nothing supernatural about it. No, but God designed his world for this effect to occur in the sky, and he did that for a particular reason. God's design of nature and the elements of nature are not there just by random chance, no matter what people try to tell you. No, they're there very intentionally, signaling to us something about God. In the case of the rainbow, it's a sign of the promise that he made to Noah, to his sons, and all living flesh. He's never going to destroy the earth again like that. And it ought to be a reminder to us of God's grace in saving mankind and allowing us to live on this earth even after so much wickedness was spread before the flood. It should be a reminder to us that we don't want to go back to living like those pre-flood people that received the judgment of God. Right? We want to be on God's side. We want to be with Noah. So that takes us to our final section, verses 18 through 29, which is the end of the chapter, Noah's drunkenness and Ham's curse. So it seems like a little bit of time passes between these instructions and the covenant that God makes with Noah and his sons, and then the events of verses 18 through 29. We know that because Noah has to grow a vineyard before these events could occur, and so there is a little bit of time that it passes here. Noah's drunkenness and Ham's curse. So Noah, as we mentioned, had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One day, Noah became drunk on wine from his vineyard and laid naked in his tent. We're told that Noah became a man of the soil, that he cultivated grapes, and here he makes wine, and he gets drunk on this wine, and he's laying in his tent naked. Now, what do we know about being naked from the opening pages of the Bible? It's something to be ashamed of, right? That happened after the fall of man. After sin entered into the world, Adam and Eve were naked. Originally, they weren't ashamed, but when sin entered the world, when they disobeyed God, they became ashamed, and God made coverings for them. So they're supposed to be covered. Noah is supposed to be covered. He's not supposed to be exposing himself. However, because he gets drunk, he lays down in his tent in a place where people could potentially see him, and he's naked. And Ham, his son, sees his father naked, and he went and he told his 2 brothers. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Let's see what happens immediately after this. Shem and Japheth, when they're told by Ham about their father, they take a garment and cover their father, but they do this without looking at him. It says that they put this garment on their shoulders, they walk backwards so that they can't see their father laying there naked, and they put this covering over their father, covering his shame and covering him in his embarrassing state. What's interesting is when Noah wakes up, the way that he responds. This tells us a little bit about Ham's actions and the way that we're supposed to perceive this situation. When Noah awoke and realized that what his children had done, he cursed Ham's son, Canaan. So he curses Ham's offspring. Ham, remember, is the one who saw him naked and went and ran and told his brothers. And he declared that Ham's offspring would be servants to his brother's offspring. So he basically curses his son Ham, and he says that his descendants are always going to be subjects to his brother's descendants. Now, why does he do this? Isn't this kind of extreme? It was Noah's fault in the first place, wasn't it, that he was laying there drunk and naked? If he hadn't been drunk, he probably wouldn't have been naked and got himself into this situation in the first place. So what exactly is occurring here? Well, there's some interpretation that has to happen because we aren't given all of the details here. And so there's a couple different ideas about the wrong that Ham did to his father. Let's go over two that I think are probably the most popular, and I'll tell you which one I prefer and think makes the most sense. So the first one comes from the language that's used in the text, that Ham saw his father's nakedness. There are some passages in the book of Leviticus where this has kind of a sexual aspect to it. And so there's some people who think that there was some kind of abuse that happened here between Ham and Noah, and that's why Noah's so upset about this and why he curses the entire coming generations of Ham's family through his son Canaan. So that's one possibility. I've heard that suggested by quite a few people. I will say that's not as convincing to me as this next interpretation, and I think it's just because the next interpretation seems like the simplest one. It seems like the most natural from the reading, and that is that Ham saw his father naked, and it says he goes and he tells his brothers. Rather than covering his father in this shameful state and just keeping it a secret and preserving his father's dignity, Ham goes and he starts telling people about what he's seen. And from what I've read in the Hebrew, there's some suggestions that not only did he tell his brothers what he saw, but he did this in kind of a delightful way, in a mocking way, like he was making fun of his father for doing this. And so rather than helping his father, he kind of makes fun of him, and he goes and tells on him to his brothers. And then it's his brothers that have to cover Noah's shame and cover up and fix the situation. And to me personally, I think that makes more sense. I think it's a more natural reading of the text. And I think it also makes sense in what we see in the way that Shem and Japheth cover their father. They don't even want to see their father in that state. They want to preserve his dignity. So they go in and they do the honorable thing to protect their father and to not cause him any more harm, whereas Ham did the opposite. He went and told a bunch of people, and he didn't really care to just fix the problem the way it should have been fixed, in the first place. He should have been the one who covered up his father and dealt with the problem right then and there, and it had been over, and then it would have been solved, but he didn't choose to go that route. And so I think because he doesn't do that, that's why Noah's so upset with him. And maybe there's some things communicated by Shem and Japheth here to their father when he wakes up about Ham's actions, but we just don't know. So Noah wakes up and he realizes what's happened, and he curses Ham's son, Canaan. And so Canaan's descendants are going to be the servants of Shem and of Japheth. And we'll see that a little bit more as we talk about the descendants of these guys in the next chapter, and I'll point that out when we get to the descendants of Canaan and compare them to the descendants of Shem. And it helps to know a little bit of Old Testament history, but I will give you the quick summary of that when we get there. So that is the majority of this third section. We do, at the very end of this chapter, have a quick summary of the rest of Noah's life. We're told that Noah lived 350 years after the flood and that he died at the age of 950. So Noah lives a very, very long time. He's not quite Methuselah at 969, but 950 is not too far off. So that's Genesis chapter 9. Now let's finish up with an application and return to this idea of God being seen through his creation and God creating things intentionally to communicate things about himself. So reminders of God's goodness are scattered throughout nature. Obviously, in this chapter, it's the rainbow. The rainbow reminds us of God's grace, of his promise not to flood the earth again. We see other places in the Bible, though, where the things that God has created and he's built into the natural order, they tell us something about God, maybe about his nature, his characteristics, the way that he should be viewed. God's care for the sparrows reminds us that he will provide for his children and their daily needs, according to Jesus' words in Matthew 6:26. In Matthew 6:28 and 29, Jesus talks about the flowers of the field. They remind us that God will clothe us, that God cares about us, that if he cares so much about these insignificant flowers that bloom and pop up all over the earth and are there one day and are gone another day, certainly if he cares about those, he makes them beautiful, then he'll care about us. He cares about us and he's going to clothe us and give us the things that we need. The new lambs in the pasture remind us of his gentleness and sacrifice. Now, in the United States, I grew up in Ohio. We don't have a lot of sheep in Ohio, but now I live in Albania, and you see new lambs in the field all the time. So these new lambs in the pasture remind us of the gentleness of God, the sacrifice of Jesus. And Jesus is compared to this particular animal. God created that animal with a particular nature, knowing that his Savior would mimic that animal in many ways. Or maybe it's the other way around. The animal mimics the Savior. And then we have another animal on kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, the lion. The lion was created to portray the characteristics of the Savior in certain ways. The lion on the savannah reminds us of God's power to protect us and to overcome the enemy. Revelation chapter 5 and verse 5. So God has built all of these reminders into his world. They're not here by mistake, and I think it's wise of us to look for signs and lessons about our Creator in the natural order. Look at the way that Jesus taught about so many parables about natural things. There's a lot that we can learn from the creation because it's the handiwork of God. And there's lessons all throughout it if we look closely enough. One is the rainbow. It's raining outside my window right now. I don't think we're going to get a rainbow. I don't see a whole lot of rainbows here in Albania, but I used to live on the island of Guam, and we used to have rainbows all the time because during the rainy season, it would rain really quickly and then the sun would come back out right after that. So we would have sometimes multiple rainbows a day. And that was a great and a beautiful reminder of this promise. I don't think I'm going to get to see a rainbow today, maybe, but wherever you are and whatever the weather is like, thanks for joining us for another study. And Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow for Genesis chapter 10. If you have a moment, leave a rating for the podcast in your podcast player. It usually doesn't take too long to do that, and it helps us out a ton. Lord willing, I'll see you again for our very next study as we talk about the generations that come from Noah and from his children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and how an empty world goes to being a populated world once again.